The Empire took our cities in a week and our skies in a day, and they were so certain they'd won that they never understood the warning we gave them. The one final warning, delivered not as a threat but as a kindness, by a people who knew something about being conquered that the conquerors had never learned. They thought we were threatening them. We were trying to save them. And because they couldn't tell the difference, they stayed, and it cost them everything, and the worst part is we told them. We told them exactly what would happen. They just couldn't hear a warning that wasn't a threat. Let me tell you what it was like, being conquered, because you have to live under the boot to understand what we eventually said to the people standing on us. My name is Tomas, and I was nobody, a man in an occupied city, one of billions, living under the empire the way you live under weather, because that's what an occupation becomes after the first shock. Weather. The sovereign dominion, they called themselves, and they were everything the word empire promises: vast, ancient, overwhelming. A conquest civilization that had been swallowing worlds for longer than humanity had been writing things down. When they came for Earth, it was not a war, not really. A war is between two powers. This was a force of nature arriving. They had technology we couldn't comprehend, weapons we couldn't answer, ships that blotted out the sky, and they took our world the way the tide takes a sandcastle, not cruelly, even just completely, with the bored efficiency of a people who had done this 1,000 times and had a procedure for it. Our militaries fought. They were brushed aside. Our cities fell. And within a few weeks the sovereign dominion stood on Earth as its new masters, and began the thing they had come to do, which was to make us part of their empire, to occupy us, rule us, integrate us, the way they had integrated 1,000 worlds before. I want to tell you about the soldiers, the ones who actually stood on our streets, because they're the part of an empire you actually meet. They were not monsters. That surprised me, and it's important. The Dominion's occupation troops were disciplined, professional, almost courteous in a distant way. They were not there to brutalize us, because brutalizing the conquered is inefficient, and the Dominion was nothing if not efficient. They were there to administer us, to process us into the empire. They set up their garrisons and their checkpoints and their administration, and they went about the business of occupation with the calm competence of people doing a routine job, because to them it was routine. They had occupied 1,000 worlds. They knew exactly how it went. You arrive, you defeat the militaries, you take the cities, you install the administration, and then, this was the part they were certain of, the part their whole confidence rested on: the conquered people, after a period of resentment, settle. They always settle. Every world they'd ever taken had resented them at first, and then, within a generation, accepted them, integrated, become part of the empire, because that is what conquered peoples do. They adapt, they survive, they make their peace with the new masters, because what else can you do? The Dominion had watched 1,000 worlds do exactly that. They were certain Earth would be the 1,001st. I want to give you the texture of it those first months, because the strangeness of an occupation is a thing you can't understand from the outside. It is not mostly dramatic. That's the part nobody tells you. After the first terrible week, the week the skies fell and the cities burned and the world we'd known ended, it settled into something almost worse than terror, which was routine. You still had to eat. You still had to find water and shelter and keep your family alive. And so you did the unthinkable thing, the thing every conquered people has always done, which is you adapted to the unbearable, because the alternative was to lie down and die, and most people can't. The body won't let you. So we lined up for the Dominion's rations. We carried the Dominion's identity tokens. We learned the Dominion's rules, where we could go and when, what was forbidden, how to stand at a checkpoint so you didn't get flagged. We learned their language, the bits we needed. We did all of it. From the outside, from a Dominion administrator's desk, it must have looked exactly like the beginning of the settling they'd seen 1,000 times. The conquered people, after the shock, getting on with the business of survival under the new masters. Compliance everywhere you looked. And that compliance was real, on the surface, and it fooled them completely, because they could not see the thing underneath it. the thing that made our compliance different from every other world's. We complied the way you comply with a kidnapper while you wait for your moment, not the way you comply with a government you've accepted. There's a difference, and it's invisible from the outside and total on the inside. The other 1,000 worlds I came to believe had complied and then slowly meant it, had let the compliance sink down into acceptance, until going along with the empire stopped being survival and became simply life, the new normal, the way things were. That's settling. That's what an occupation is waiting for, and we did the first part, the complying, perfectly. But the second part, the sinking down, the meaning it, the acceptance, that part never came and was never going to come, and the Dominion mistook the perfect surface of our compliance for the beginning of the acceptance that lay beneath it on every other world and would never, ever lie beneath it on ours. And here is the thing I have to make you understand, the thing that is the whole story, the thing the Dominion could not see because they had never once in their long history encountered an exception. They were wrong about us. Not because we were stronger than the other 1,000 worlds, we weren't. We were weaker than most, we'd been conquered easily. Not because we had some hidden weapon, we didn't. They were wrong about us because of something in what we were, something the other conquered peoples apparently hadn't had, or hadn't had enough of, and it took the Dominion a long time and a terrible price to learn what it was. We did not settle. We were never going to settle. And nobody on Earth had to organize that or decide it or declare it. It simply was true, the way it's true of certain animals that they will die rather than be caged, except it was true of a whole species, and the Dominion had just caged us, and did not yet know what they'd done. There was a soldier at the checkpoint near where I lived. I came to know his face, the way you come to know the face of the thing standing on you. And one day, in the slow way these things happen, we talked. His translator did the work. He was not unkind. He'd been doing this a long time, occupying worlds, and he had the weary patience of a man who'd seen the whole cycle many times, and I think he talked to me because I was a curiosity to him, a conquered man who looked at him a certain way. He told me, almost gently, that it would get easier, that he'd seen it on 100 worlds. That the anger I was feeling, he could see it under my compliance. They weren't blind, just wrong about what it meant, was normal, was the first stage, and that it would pass. Your grandchildren, he said, will be citizens of the Dominion and will not remember this as anything but history. They will not feel what you feel. The wound closes. It always closes. I have watched it close 100 times. Give it a generation. You will be one of us and you will be glad of it, or your children will be, and the pain you feel now will seem to them like a strange old story. He said it kindly. He believed it completely. It was the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 conquests, and on 1,000 worlds it had been true. And I looked at him and I felt the thing rise in me, the quiet absolute thing, and I almost told him. I almost said, "You don't understand. The wound will not close. Not in a generation, not in 10, not ever. You've conquered peoples who could be conquered. You've never met one that can't. My grandchildren will hate you exactly as much as I do, and they'll have learned it from me without my ever teaching it, because it isn't a lesson, it's what we are, and you cannot occupy what we are. You can only stand on top of it forever, bleeding, until you can't anymore." I almost said it. I didn't that day because I was afraid, and because it wasn't yet the time, and because I didn't have all the words. But that thing I almost said to a tired soldier at a checkpoint, that was the warning. That was humanity's one final warning in the rough, before anyone had refined it into the thing we finally delivered. The wound will not close. You have caged a thing that does not survive being caged and does not die of it either, but simply goes on refusing forever. And an empire cannot live forever on top of a forever refusal. We knew it. He didn't. And the gap between what we knew and what he believed was the gap the whole Dominion was about to fall into. I felt it in myself before I understood it. In those first weeks of occupation, when the smart thing, the survival thing, was to keep my head down and adapt and make my peace, I found I couldn't. Not out of bravery. I'm not brave. It was something more stubborn and more involuntary than bravery, a thing that lived under my thoughts that simply would not bend. I would walk past a Dominion checkpoint and do what I was told and smile and comply, and inside, in a place I couldn't have stopped if I'd wanted to, there was a voice that said, quiet and absolute, "No, not them, not ever. This is not yours and it never will be, and I will be saying no in my heart on the day I die." And I looked at the other people in the checkpoint line, and I saw the same thing in their faces, the same quiet absolute refusal under the compliance. A whole city of people doing what they were told and meaning, every one of them no. And I understood that the Dominion had conquered our cities and our skies and our militaries, and had not conquered, would never conquer, the one thing that actually mattered, which was the part of us that decides whether a conquest is real. And I started to see it everywhere. Once I knew to look, the refusal, living in 10,000 small things the Dominion couldn't read. It was in the way people helped each other in small illegal ways, sharing rations the Dominion had rationed precisely, hiding things, passing word, the whole quiet underground machinery of a people taking care of its own behind the occupiers' backs. Not yet rebellion, nothing so organized, just the refusal to let the Dominion become the only thing that fed and ruled and mattered. It was in the jokes. God, the jokes. We made fun of them constantly, in our own languages, in looks and gestures the soldiers couldn't parse. And a people that is still laughing at its conquerors has not been conquered in the way that counts, because mockery is the refusal to be afraid, and the Dominion fed on a fear we declined to give them. It was in the way we kept our own things alive in secret, our histories, our songs, our names for places that the Dominion had renamed, our memory of what the world had been before them, passed to children in whispers, so that the next generation would inherit not acceptance but the same unbroken no. The soldier had told me the wound would close in a generation. He didn't know that we were, every one of us, in 1,000 small daily ways, deliberately keeping it open, teaching it to our children, feeding it, refusing with our whole quiet collective will to let it heal into acceptance, because we understood without ever discussing it, that the healing was the only victory the Dominion could ever actually win, and we would die before we'd let the wound close. And that was the warning in the end. That's what humanity's one final warning actually was, though it took us time to find the words and the Dominion never did manage to hear them. It was not a threat. We had nothing to threaten them with. It was the truth, delivered in the end, by people who understood something terrible and merciful at the same time, that the Dominion had just made the one mistake their whole empire could not survive, and that the kind thing, the only decent thing, was to warn them while there was still time to undo it. That's where I have to stop this first time. Because what that warning actually said, the truth about occupation that the Dominion had never learned in 1,000 conquests, the thing humanity knew in its bones that no empire ever understands until it's too late, and how we delivered it, and why it was a mercy and not a threat, and what happened when the conquerors could not tell the difference. That's the whole of the story, and I need you standing exactly here first. In an occupied city on a conquered earth, a nobody in a checkpoint line, smiling and complying and meaning no with my whole soul, one of a billion quiet refusals that the Dominion had mistaken for a settling that was never, ever going to come. The warning, when it finally came, did not come from a government, because we didn't have one anymore. The Dominion had dissolved our governments the way you'd dissolve any administrative inconvenience. It came from the people who had emerged, the way they always do under occupation, to speak for a conquered people when the official voices are gone. And it was not delivered the way you'd expect a warning to be delivered, with defiance or with rage. It was delivered by the men and women who carried it to the Dominion's administrators, calmly, almost sorrowfully, the way you tell someone a hard truth they need to hear for their own sake. Because that's what it was. That was the thing the Dominion could never get their minds around, then or ever. We were not warning them what we would do to them. We were warning them what they had done to themselves. Here is what the warning said. I've heard it many times now in many forms, but the heart of it never changed, and the heart of it was this. You believe you have conquered us, and you have. You have our cities, our skies, our worlds. You defeated our armies, and you rule our streets, and by every measure you have ever used, you have won. We are not here to dispute that. We are here to tell you something you do not know, something that no one has ever been alive to tell you, because the worlds that learned it too late and died of it before they could speak. So listen, because we are the first people in your long history who is going to warn you before the price comes due. An occupation is not a thing you do to a people. It is a thing a people lets you do. You think you hold a world by force by your soldiers, your weapons, your ships in our sky. You are wrong. Force can win a war. Force cannot hold a peace. The 1,000 worlds you have occupied did not stay occupied because of your soldiers. They stayed occupied because, in the end, they accepted it, because the conquered people, after a generation, stopped refusing, let the wound close, agreed in their hearts to be yours. That acceptance is the only thing that has ever held an empire together. Your soldiers were never holding those worlds. The worlds were holding themselves for you because they had decided to. You have never once in your history held a world that did not, eventually, agree to be held. And we are telling you plainly as a kindness, we will never agree. Not now, not in a generation, not in 100. It is not a decision we are making, which is why you cannot change it. You cannot frighten us out of it or bribe us out of it or wait us out of it, because it is not a position, it is what we are. We are a people that does not accept being owned, the way some peoples do not accept being killed. You can stand on us forever. We will refuse forever. Every child we raise will refuse. We will keep the wound open across as many generations as you stay, deliberately, lovingly, because we have understood the thing you have not, that the only victory you could ever win over us is our acceptance, and that is the one thing in all the universe that is wholly ours to give or withhold, and we will withhold it until the stars go out. Do you understand what that means for you? It means you have not conquered a world. You have adopted a wound that will not heal. To hold Earth, you will have to garrison it forever. Not for a generation, until we settle, but forever, because we will never settle, and a garrison that can never leave is not a conquest. It is a hemorrhage. We will cost you every year in soldiers and treasure and attention, and we will never stop costing you, and we will never give you the one thing that would make the cost stop, which is our consent. You have 1,000 other worlds to hold. You cannot bleed forever on one of them. Hold us, and we will be the wound that drains your empire 1 year at a time, for centuries, until you are too weak to hold the rest. And the 1,000 worlds that did settle, watching you bleed on us, remember that they too once refused. And an empire is only ever one example away from every conquered world remembering it could refuse. That is the warning. It is not a threat. We have nothing to threaten you with. You have all the weapons. It is the truth, and we are giving it to you freely, even though you are our enemy, even though you have killed our people and taken our world, because we would rather you leave than that both our peoples bleed for a century over a thing that was decided the moment you landed. Leave now, while leaving costs you only pride. Stay, and it will cost you your empire. We have told you. No one ever told you before. Whatever happens now, remember that we told you. That was the warning. And I want you to sit with how strange it was, how unlike anything the Dominion had ever received, because in 1,000 conquests, every warning they'd ever gotten had been a threat, a promise of harm, a "we will hurt you if you don't leave." They knew how to answer those. You answer a threat with superior force, and the Dominion always had superior force. But this was not that. This was an enemy with no weapons at their mercy, calmly explaining to them that their own victory was the trap, that the thing they'd won was the thing that would destroy them, and offering them, sincerely, as a mercy, the chance to escape a doom of their own making. The Dominion had no procedure for that. There was no answer in their 1,000 years of doctrine for a conquered people that warned you, kindly, that you had beaten them into a corner that was actually your own grave. So they did the thing that doomed them. They heard the warning as a threat, because it was the only kind of warning they understood, and they answered it the way they answered threats, with contempt and with force. They told us, in effect, that a conquered people's defiance was nothing new, that every world resented them at first, that our brave words changed nothing, that they would hold Earth as they had held 1,000 worlds, and we would settle as 1,000 worlds had settled. They could not hear the warning because hearing it would have required them to believe, for the first time in their history, that they had met an exception, and an empire that has won 1,000 times cannot believe in the exception until it is the exception, until it is already bleeding, until it is far too late. That's where I have to stop this first time. Because what happened when the Dominion stayed, when they dismissed humanity's one final warning as the empty defiance of the conquered, and settled in to hold Earth the way they'd held everything, and slowly, year by year, discovered that every word of the warning was true, and what it is to watch an empire bleed to death on the thing it thought it had won. That's the resolution, the whole of it, and I need you standing exactly here first. At the moment of the warning, an unarmed conquered people telling their conquerors the truth that could save them, as a kindness, and the conquerors unable to hear any warning that wasn't a threat, choosing, in their certainty, to stay and to bleed. They stayed, of course they stayed. And then, year by year, exactly as we'd told them, the warning came true, not in a battle, not in an uprising, but in the slow grinding way the truest things come true, the way water wins against stone, the way a wound that won't close eventually takes the whole body. I lived the years that proved it. I won't pretend they were easy, or that we were noble all the way through, because occupation is not noble. It's grinding and frightening and full of small humiliations and real losses, and people died, and people broke, and some people did settle, gave up, made their peace. I won't lie about that. There were collaborators and there were the simply exhausted, because we're human and humans are not all one thing. But the warning held, because the warning was never about every single person. It was about the whole, and the whole never settled. For every person who gave up, a child was born who hadn't, who inherited the way you inherit a language, without being taught, just by growing up breathing it. The Dominion would think they'd finally pacified a region, finally won acceptance, and then a new generation would come up exactly as unaccepting as the last, and they'd realize they'd gained nothing, that the wound they thought was healing had only grown new edges. We did not have to fight them mostly. That's the part people get wrong about how we won, the same way they get the warning wrong. We didn't win with weapons. We won by simply, endlessly, refusing, by being a cost that never came due as a victory, a garrison that could never go home, a hemorrhage that the bandage of force could slow but never stop. And it drained them, slowly then faster. Holding Earth cost the Dominion soldiers and treasure and ships and attention, every year, with no end and no return, the way we told them it would. And an empire is a balance, 1,000 worlds held in a careful equilibrium of force and acceptance. And we were the world that took and never gave back the acceptance that would have let them rest. They had to keep more and more strength here on us, the one world that would never settle, and that strength came from somewhere, came from the other worlds, the 1,000 that had settled. And as the Dominion bled itself thin holding Earth, its grip on those other worlds loosened. And the other worlds noticed. That was the thing the warning had promised and the thing that finished the Dominion. The conquered worlds, the settled ones, watching the mighty Dominion bleed for decades on one stubborn planet and fail to break it, began to remember a thing they'd made themselves forget, the thing the Dominion most needed them never to remember, that the Dominion's power over them had only ever been their own acceptance, and that acceptance could be withdrawn, because here was Earth, proving it could be withheld forever. We didn't free those worlds. We just reminded them they were never as conquered as they'd agreed to be. And one by one, over a long time, they remembered, and they began to do what we did, to withhold, to refuse, to keep their own wounds open. And an empire whose conquered worlds all start refusing at once is an empire that is already over. It just doesn't know the date yet. The Dominion fell, not to a fleet, not to a weapon, not to humanity rising up in glorious battle the way the legend tells it. It fell the way every empire built on force eventually falls. It bled to death on the worlds it could not get to love it, and Earth was the womb that started it, the first world in 1,000 years to refuse so completely and so patiently that it taught a whole galaxy of the conquered to refuse too. We didn't conquer the Dominion. We just declined to be conquered, harder and longer than they could afford, and let the arithmetic do the rest. And here is the part I most need you to understand, the part that is the whole reason this is a story worth telling and not just a tale of an empire's fall. When the Dominion finally broke, when their power collapsed and their soldiers withdrew from Earth at last, beaten not by us but by the slow truth we'd warned them of, we did not slaughter them. We could have, by then. In the chaos of their collapse, the occupiers on Earth were vulnerable, and there were voices, God knows, that wanted blood for the decades of occupation, for the dead, for the humiliations. But the people who'd carried the warning carried this too, the same spirit, and it won. Because we had told them the truth at the start as a kindness, and you cannot warn an enemy as a mercy at the beginning and then butcher them at the end without making a liar of everything you were. We had said, leave, we don't want this to destroy you. They hadn't listened. It had destroyed them anyway, and when it had, we did not gloat, and we did not slaughter, we let them go. We let the beaten occupiers withdraw, and we let the broken Dominion limp away to be whatever it would become without its empire, because the whole point, the entire moral spine of what we'd done was that we had never wanted to destroy them. We'd only wanted to not be owned. The warning was true. It had never been a threat. We proved it was never a threat by, at the end, when we held all the cards, doing the thing a threat never does, which is letting the enemy live. People tell this story now as a tale of terrible power. The Galactic Empire invaded Earth, and humanity delivered one final warning, and they hear the warning as a threat, as the moment before humanity unleashed some hidden wrath and crushed the invaders. And every time I correct them, because I lived under the boot and I carried the truth in my own stubborn heart for decades, and the warning was the opposite of what they think. We had no wrath to unleash. We had no hidden weapon. The warning was not leave or we will destroy you. It was leave or you will destroy yourselves on us, and we are telling you because we would genuinely rather you didn't. It was the most honest thing one people has ever said to another, and it was a mercy offered to an enemy, and they could not hear it, because they had spent 1,000 years learning that every warning is a threat and a conquered people is a conquered people, and they could not imagine the one thing that was true, that they had finally met a people who could not be conquered, who knew it, and who cared enough even about their enemy to warn them before the price came due. We didn't beat the Dominion with strength. We beat it with the one thing no empire can take and no weapon can touch, the simple, stubborn, unconquerable refusal of a free people to ever, in their hearts, agree to be owned. The Dominion conquered our whole world and never took a single inch of the only ground that mattered, and we told them so at the start, kindly, as one final warning. They should have listened. We told them. Remember whatever else you remember about us. We told them, and the telling, offered freely to the enemy at our mercy, was the truest measure of what we were. Not a people too dangerous to conquer, a people who could not be conquered and who warned even their conquerors, because being unconquerable had never made us cruel. It had only made us free. And the free, it turns out, would rather warn an enemy than destroy one, which is exactly why we could never be owned, and exactly why, in the end, we won.